Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for the inaugural Penn Law Symposium presented by the Heisman Trust. My name is Eli Klein. I'm the president of the Penn Law Entertainment and Sports Law Society. On behalf of our executive board and the co-symposium organizers, Grant Darwin and David Simon, I'd like to welcome you to the University of Pennsylvania Law School and the Dean Michael A. Fitz Auditorium. Our symposium today, A Blurred Line, Issues Surrounding the Transition from Amateur to Professional Status in Sports, is more pertinent than ever. In recent months, we have seen Time magazine place a college athlete on its front cover for the first time since 1966, the attempted unionization of the Northwestern football team on behalf of private NCAA institutions, and the recent significant procedural developments in the O'Bannon vs. NCAA litigation as it nears its June trial date. The status of the amateur athlete has never been more uncertain. It is indeed truly a blurred line. We hope that you are as eager as we are to hear the diverse views of our panelists and our keynote speaker, Big Ten Conference Commissioner Jim Delaney, on this timely and involving topic. In a recent article by Philadelphia Inquirer sports reporter Michael Jensen, Wharton Professor Kenneth Shropshire, one of our moderators this morning, remarked that with 4 major sports teams and the union offices just a train ride away, Philadelphia is one of the best laboratories for the academic study of sports. With that said, we are thrilled to welcome you to the home of the historic Palestra, the legendary Franklin Field, and to the law school situated among our peer Big Five academic institutions in the city that is the hotbed for the academic discourse on sports. I would take a moment to thank a number of key individuals without whom this event would not have been possible. Our Dean of Students, Gary Clinton, Associate Director of Student Development, Dimitri Islam, Student Affairs Administrator, Julie Calalori, our Business Administrator, Michelle Warner, and the entire ESLS board. Before we begin, just a few administrative announcements. As you saw when you're entering, we are having a raffle for Philadelphia 76ers courtside seats and VIP experiences. Tickets are $10 for one, $25 for 3. Here's how it's going to work. At the end of the third panel, we're going to draw 3 names. Those 3 individuals will then be asked a series of trivia questions. Whoever answers the most will receive the first set of vouchers. Tomorrow, after the symposium, we will draw 5 names. Of those 5 names, 2 will receive vouchers. They will be asked a series of trivia questions. The 2 who answer the most correctly will receive vouchers, and the 3rd will receive a signed copy of a picture of Philadelphia legend and former 76ers center LaVoy Allen. Twitter, please do not forget to tweet at us today at Penn Law ESLS, as you can see on the board, and be sure to use the hashtag PLSLS14, PLSLS14. Free Wi-Fi is available all day long. The login information can be found in your program. Of course, fear not, coffee will be available throughout the day right outside of the auditorium in the Davis Student Union. I promise not to hoard it, although I am on cup 4 already. We'd appreciate if you would assist our fantastic facilities and Miss Vanessa outside and throw out your garbage throughout the day. So now that we have that taken care of, I'd like to recognize and introduce another individual who has played a critical role in making not only this event, but everything we do as students possible. And that's the Dean of the Law School, Michael Fitz. With his focus on interdisciplinary education and collaboration, he has fostered an environment dedicated to ensuring his students have the opportunity to pursue their diverse passions, such as the legal studies surrounding the sports industry. We will be sad to see him leave at the end of this academic year, but certainly take pride in his honor of being named the 15th president of Tulane University. And we are particularly pleased to have him here today instead of New Orleans enjoying the beginning of Mardi Gras. But we will be having just as much fun right here in the Michael A. Fitz Auditorium at our own party, the inaugural Penn Law Sports Law Symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Fitz.
I must say, that's a wonderful introduction. I should note that I literally can't get down to Tulane this weekend because there are no hotel rooms left in New Orleans, and we all know why. I really want to thank everybody for being part of this symposium. I don't need to tell this group, how important sports is at this moment in our society, both financially, economically, but also culturally, and in terms of the identity of so many institutions. how complex it is. We talk all the time about law being regulating so many different areas of our society, and we talk about tax lawyers getting involved in the intricacies of the code, but quite frankly nowadays sports really rivals every single area you can imagine in terms of the lines that are drawn and the complexity, and the distinction between amateur and professional, as Eli said, is just become so blurred and so fundamental at the same time that this symposium is really a marvelous opportunity to focus on one of the most important issues facing institutions, academic institutions, as well as pros today. Now, I really have to congratulate the students, both Eli Grant and David Simon, who really put this all together, and it went from a period over 8 or 9 months from idea to fruition to everybody sitting here. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, there's so many aspects of this law school that are extraordinary, but the energy, the entrepreneurship of the student body is second to none. And this, I've never seen a better example of sort of passion, idea, fruition than putting together this conference of the Sports Law Society. So I haven't had another opportunity to do this. I want to give all of them a round of applause and appreciation. Now, I do want to note we have, Eli mentioned, an incredibly interdisciplinary law school, and we have all sorts of relationships across the university. And in this symposium, we actually have 3 individuals on the faculty here and across the university who are deeply involved in sports. And I just want to make a special note of 3 people. First, Steve Burbank, who is the Berger Professor of Law here, one of the leading civil procedure faculty members in the world, but also I should note, and most importantly for this symposium, he's the special master for the NFL. And of course that means every few months we have literally hundreds of lawyers racing around the law school when there happens to be some proceeding before him. Then of course Ken Shropshire, who actually did play football, as I recall, at Stanford University, is the Houck Professor over at Wharton and runs their Sports Law Center. And it's great to have Ken involved with this, as well as Andrew Brandt, who teaches at Wharton and is the NFL business analyst for ESPN, who will also be chairing a panel. They're all important figures here at Penn, but I do have to mention the most important connection between the University of Pennsylvania Law School and sports, and that, of course, is John Heisman, who graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, played football while he was at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and is known for being a huge innovator in sports. He was a great proponent of the forward pass. He is known for the person who articulated the hike as the beginning of the football game, and also a great proponent of moving from halves to quarters in football. So a true innovator, and of course it is the Heisman Trust, which is the major funder of this conference. So we think about the University of Pennsylvania Law School in many respects. I suspect the University of Pennsylvania Law football team is not exactly up there in the national limelight, but we do claim John Heisman as one of our distinguished graduates and an innovator in football. And hopefully today's conference will be a worthy successor to many of the ideas and innovations that he started in sports. So I want to finally thank all of you and the other participants in this conference. Really, it's a breadth of expertise across the board and across the country that we only could have imagined at the beginning of this conference, and you honor us all by your presence. So without further ado, I really have to turn this over to David Simon, who is going to, I think, introduce the first panel, and we will go on from there. So thank you all, and welcome to this conference.
Thank you, Dean Fitz. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Rand Getlin, who will deliver opening remarks. Mr. Getlin is an award-winning reporter and legal analyst for Yahoo Sports, who has worked on countless groundbreaking stories, including investigations that revealed corruption in programs such as Alabama, Oregon, and Miami. He has devoted much attention to topics such as the transition of players to the National Football League through the NFL Draft, the recent Richie Incognito Jonathan Martin scandal, and a number of lawsuits and investigations initiated by NFL players against their agents and financial advisors. He graduated from the University of Oregon with a political science degree and the University of Southern California's Gould School of Law with a JD. Please welcome to the podium, Mr. Rand Getlin.
Well, good morning. How are you guys doing today? Early, cold? I'm from Southern California, so I'm not used to 12 degrees when I walk out of the hotel, but I'm alive, which is a good thing. How can I get this going, gents? You set up? Yes, sir. I got you. Cool. So by show of hands, how many of you guys are students? Great. I'll make clear my comments, thank you very much, are largely going to be aimed at you guys. One of the big benefits of doing what I do is every once in a while, somebody asked me to come speak to a group of students because I went to law school and I love doing these things. And the reason is because you guys are the future of the sports industry. Those of you that are here are clearly interested in the business of sports to the extent that you will be the thinkers and the individuals that are shaping the policies that guide us into the future. It's very exciting to have an opportunity to speak to you. I'm not that far removed. In 2009, I graduated from USC, so I was sitting in these seats thinking to myself, how can I get involved in this industry? How can I make meaningful change? Etc. And so it's an absolute honor to be here with you 5 years later. I want to thank the staff that put together, or the committee that put together the event. Obviously a lot of distinguished individuals in attendance, and it's a great honor to be here. I would like to thank the Dean for sponsoring this and basically incubating a culture that allows for these kinds of events to occur. So what we're going to go ahead and jump into initially, I want to show you the stories I've worked on since 2010, which is when I started in the business. Again, I told you I graduated from law school in 2009. A couple of the stories that we worked on had to do with the college space. So UNC, Miami, Oregon, Alabama. Those of you that follow college athletics closely probably heard a little bit about each one of those. UNC, you had an associate head coach who was being paid by an agent ostensibly to help in recruiting to some extent. Well, they denied that. It's pretty clear that this agent was signing players from this school that were under the tutelage of the coach. There's a question there if there's a conflict. Obviously, there's a legal component there that you think about. Miami, you had Nevin Shapiro, almost $1 billion Ponzi scheme is what he was running. And he was donating money to the University of Miami, had his name on a student lounge. That's an interesting thing to look at, not necessarily from a legal perspective, just generally. University of Oregon, they had a recruiting service where a guy out of Texas, Houston, Texas, was being paid $25,000 to help them recruit. It came down that it was outside of NCAA regulations. It's a question about what was going on there. Alabama, you had DJ Fluker. There were a number of other schools that we mentioned, but he's a particularly interesting case, and I'll get into it a little bit later. But Fluker grew up extremely poor. His family was washed out by Katrina. They were sleeping in cars and garages, and we were able to document that he'd taken about $40,000. I didn't do that, my own personal motivation, to say shame on DJ Fluker, more so to say, NCAA, are you going to punish a kid who was sleeping in cars and garages for taking $40,000 for necessities like bed sets, etc.? These are the questions that you guys have to contemplate and decide, again, what direction we're going to go in moving forward. On the pro side, I worked on a story on the National Basketball Players Association with Billy Hunter, the former executive director, and the business practices he had at the NBPA, including, it came out later, I believe there was a special report by Ted Wells, the same guy that did the Incognito report, where he discussed nepotism and various questionable business practices. Billy Hunter, if you've been following that, is no longer the executive director of the NBPA, and they are currently looking for new leadership. I worked on that with Adrian Wojnarowski. Rosenhaus Sports, I've been covering Rosenhaus Sports, Drew Rosenhaus in particular, their business practices over a period of years, namely to shine a light on how the business operates. And the NFLPA, which is in charge of regulating agents, to pose these questions to them. Is this acceptable behavior? And some of what we've covered, there have been kickbacks from luxury car dealers where his staffers have received monetary value, whether it be direct compensation, free rides, etc., whatever it may be, and he deemed them kickbacks in order to send business his way. A number of the players that they were sending his way ended up suing him And that was a problem. So from a legal perspective, is there a conflict there? Is this ethical behavior? And if whatever the answer to that question is, what is the NFLPA's response? Thus far, they have not responded to anything. I have not heard from them in a year. I've sent approximately 18 messages, voicemails, et cetera, to the Director of Communications, and all quiet on the NFLPA front. Jeff Rubin was a financial advisor who misappropriated or stole, depending on who you asked, roughly $53 million in player money. That included Terrell Owens, Fred Taylor, a number of other very prominent players, Javon Curse, guys that you would have heard of. He was registered by the NFLPA, and he had a deep-seated recruiting relationship with Drew Rosenhaus. So there's a question there. What is acceptable behavior, again, from an agent, from a legal perspective, and a financial advisor? How does that work? Hodge Brombot is another guy who's the latest. He was running or participating in running an $18 million Ponzi-like scheme, according to the the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. He was also registered with the NFLPA. So I tell you all that to tell you this. There's a reason why I will be so definitive throughout this presentation, and I'll try and keep it brief. But if you have any questions for me, if you think I was too definitive about anything, I'm happy to discuss these issues at length. You can contact me on Twitter if you want to ask questions there, if you missed me today. Otherwise, I'm happy to discuss these things on a one-off basis. So the question I have for all you students is, what side of history are you going to be on? Let's put aside the legal minutia for a second. There will be plenty of people here that are much better versed in the technical components of the law that you can speak to. But from a normative standpoint, where do you want to side? You've got to abandon the right to profit off of one's own likeness. That's going on currently. Obviously, it's an elephant in the room. Wetzler, Paxton, Oliver, all baseball players who were punished in some regard either by their university or by the NCAA for utilizing counsel and exploring their professional options. Dominic Artis and Ben Carter were University of Oregon players. Now, this one's rather ironic because University of Oregon, where I am a graduate of in undergrad, University of Nike. Well, they got punished for selling their shoes. I find that to be incredible, and it's something I want to dig into. Manziel, who was scrutinized for selling his autograph. And Fluker, again, we talked about that, was scrutinized for receiving money for largely at least that which we were able to document necessities. So the question is this acceptable? Is this the way that it should be? Is this just? Is this the way we want it to be? And if not, what are we going to do to move forward into the future and figure out a way for these kids to share to a larger extent than they currently do in the value that they create in the market, which is obviously vast, and we'll dig into that in a second. I want to share some quotes from the NCAA's architects with you, or architect rather. Now, I didn't write these things, but I'd encourage you to read them, and I'm going to try and stay away from reading verbatim what's on the slides. The gentleman's name was Walter Byers. He ran the NCAA from 1951 to 1988. He got out and he wrote a book, and I might butcher the title here, but I believe it was Unsportsmanlike Conduct, the Exploitation of Student Athletes. Now, this is a guy who crafted many of the things we deal with today, including the term student athlete, which is in response to a workman's comp claim that was brought against them, and he's admitted we essentially crafted this term. It was ambiguous, and it allowed us to put the focus on these guys not necessarily being full-time students, not necessarily being full-time athletes, something in the middle, and they've won us at the NCAA. That is a series of court cases based on this construct. One thing I do want to point out is what he says here. I attribute that, quite frankly, to the neo-plantation mentality that exists on the campuses of our country and in the conference offices in the NCAA, that the rewards belong to the overseers and the supervisors. What trickles down after that can go to the athletes. Now, this is incendiary language. It may cause some people to feel very uncomfortable, and the truth is often uncomfortable. So the question is, was he overstepping his bounds? Are these statements too strong? Let me dig into a little bit more. Here are the television contracts that have currently been brought down. Former Ohio State President Gordon Gee, who, those of you who watch football, he's been very entertaining for many of us in many different ways, certainly given us a lot of laughs. But he hit the nail on the head here. He said, the addition of Maryland and Rutgers to the Big Ten gives us 40 to 50 million more viewers, and it makes the Big Ten network worth more money than God. Now, I don't know what God's net worth is, but certainly with the Big Ten, $3.8 billion for their television contract, and Mr. Delaney will be here later. Certainly, he's done a fantastic job with them. Obviously, $3.8 billion. Can't complain with the results. ACC 3.6, SEC 3.05, Pac-12 $3 billion, Big 12 $2.6 billion, for a grand total of the Big Five conferences of $16 billion. Moving on, coaching salaries. So the average compensation for coaches has increased 750% since the Regents' decision in 1984. The average compensation for coaches right now is $2 million. Nick Saban just got a contract for $7 million plus. It will rise to $7.5 million. If we were in a different forum, I'd ask you all to give Jimmy Sexton a hand. He did a fantastic job there. Jimmy Sexton is obviously an agent for a number of prominent coaches. He also happens to represent a number of their athletes. That in and of itself creates a conflict we don't have enough time today to discuss, but it's something that I think is fascinating for you guys to look into. As you see, the numbers are massive. Okay, so going back to Byers' comments, it's the idea that the overseers, those who are in charge, get most of that which is created, and whatever's left over trickles down to the players. The NCAA's stance, as you all understand, is if they start compensating players above and beyond that which they're already given, which is obviously valuable. A scholarship has tremendous value if it's utilized to garner an education. Also, all of the ancillary benefits that they receive are fantastic. Again, I went to the University of Oregon, so nobody got more benefits than our players. I lived with football players. I certainly benefited as a result of all the free sweats that I got and stuff that they wanted to kick away because they had so much. But, you know, at the end of the day, these salaries seem to indicate, and again, these are very competitive, if not above, the salaries that NFL head coaches are making. So just a graphic to pay attention to. Now, here are athletic directors on paying players, okay? So we see big television money, big head coaching money. Assistants are making big money. Some assistants are making $1 million a year. And here we have athletic directors, Dick Bedour, saying, and he used to be at UNC, he wouldn't want to be a part of paying players. They'd have to think about if UNC would get rid of basketball and football. Now, first and foremost, I don't believe that for a second. UNC's not getting rid of basketball. And nobody's going to kill the cash cow because it got a little bit skinnier. But let's take it at face value. Gary Barta of Iowa last week stuck his foot in his mouth, said, I'll probably choose to do something else for a living if we ever had to pay players because it's so complex. Mr. Barta makes $450,000 a year, but it's too complex to figure out how to pay players. Now, he figured out that Kirk Ferentz is worth 38 times more than the wrestling coach at the University of Iowa, but he cannot figure out how to distinguish the amount of money that's to be paid to players along the way. What I would say is you can pay me a little bit less than that. Give me $250,000. I'll come figure it out for you. Naval Academy AD in response to the notion of players unionizing and perhaps getting some economic rights. You can't have the animals running the zoo in a college education. Now, that is an interesting sentiment. So players are animals. He's compensated on animals' backs. Again, the neo-plantation mentality, to me, it causes me some pause and it makes me very uncomfortable. I suspect a few of you in the audience are uncomfortable as well. It's because it's uncomfortable. Oregon Associate AD. I'm not saying it's fair or right, but student athletes do sign documentation basically saying their rights belong to the university. So it's not fair or right, but you collect a paycheck. And you're not standing up and saying this system needs to change, but you are acknowledging there might be something wrong with that. That's a problem. When people see that something is unjust or skewed and they don't do anything to change it, I think that's a time, again, for you in this audience, those of you that are students, to determine, is that the side of history you're going to be on? Now, here's a little bit more from administrators and coaches. Duke head coach David Cutcliffe said nobody's getting rich off this. Makes $1.79 million a year. That's a lot more money than I'm making. I would feel pretty darn rich if I was making that much money. And certainly he's not the highest paid coach at that school. Mr. Krzyzewski makes considerably more, and for good reason. He's one of the best basketball coaches in the game, and Cutcliffe is pretty darn good himself. Alabama's, I think this was the president, not the AD, so forgive me for the typo there. Now, he came out and said Nick Saban's the best investment that the school has ever made, and he is absolutely right. The amount of money that the University of Alabama makes off of their football team is incredible. It's like a religion down there. Again, we worked on a story down there, so spent a lot of time in Tuscaloosa. Never experienced anything like it. Now, you move down. Baylor's AD. He said Robert Griffin's Heisman was worth somewhere in the ballpark of $500 million to the school. Okay? This is a guy that's coming out and acknowledging this. I'm sure his colleagues didn't appreciate him doing so. Because when you look at it, he says, we didn't have any money for our new stadium. After Robert won that, now we have $200 million coming in the door. I didn't put these comments because I didn't have room, but Johnny Manziel's school said something to the same extent. He got $37 million just from his Heisman in media exposure. That media exposure translates to donations, people signing up to come to school there, supporting the school in other ways, buying jerseys, etc. It is big, big business. But I do want to highlight something that I thought was very powerful. Princeton's AD came out, and I believe this was a couple months ago, maybe 3, 4. And you can read it yourself, but the one that I'll highlight is the last one. When you see the NCAA president making $1.7 million and commissioners making $2 million, which is understated because Larry Scott is making $3.1 and I believe Mr. Delaney is making $2.8. Where your treasure lies, so shall your heart beat. Now, that's important. When you're listening to these folks at the top, and this is important to delineate, a lot of these people who are in charge of college athletics, they're not bad people. They're great people. I know a lot of people inside of the NCAA. I know a lot of people inside of the NFLPA. They're fantastic people. I enjoy spending time with them. They're people that you would sit down and you would talk about complex issues with, and you don't disagree on much except for me, athlete compensation. But it is a question that should be asked. When you're saying that college athletes don't deserve anything more than that which they're given, or a small amount more than that which they're given, why are you so vehemently opposed to them sharing in the value they create in the market? Is it really to protect them, or is it to protect your own pockets and your own interests? Now, how much could players make? We just talked about Nick Saban making $7.5 million as he gets towards the end of this contract that he just signed, $7 million at the front. Well, players on Alabama's 2010 team would have received about $47,000 per, just off of the television rights, okay? Now, in Alabama, you would make $100,000 a year as a walk-on signing autographs, again, because it's like religion down there. Any of you who follow Clay Travis on Twitter have seen Tom Albatar, who's a guy out there who sells memorabilia. You go into his shop, which I did, and it is a veritable, I guess, gold mine in terms of Alabama memorabilia. So $190,000 over 4 years, just from the television rights. Then you add in their ability to go out and market themselves if it were allowed. They could make significant amounts of money while in school, and they could play football for the university and benefit the university, et cetera. You see the figures there, $275,000 for a Michigan State men's basketball player, et cetera. So it doesn't seem that skewed, right? We've got coaches making $7-8 million in the NFL. You've got players that make more than the coaches here. No player would make that much more than the coach as far as we can see, but if you were to straight line the figures, players would be being compensated more than they are now, and obviously you have to include the educational costs as well. Now, here's a problem that I have, and this is something that's very important. What the NCAA says is these players get a free, maybe the NCAA doesn't say it. Proponents of the NCAA's current model say, well, the players get a free education. Explain to me what free is. Currently, they're spending over 44 hours in season, and this is an NCAA study that these numbers are drawn from, 44 hours on their sport, 40 hours on academics. Now, I question the academic number because I lived with football players. But let's call it 20, okay? So we're looking at about 65 hours per week. You know, I saw a lot of students raise their hands. You guys are all probably, because you go to such a great school, going to work in big law or some variation thereof. You're working 80 hours a week, but you're making $200,000 a year. I guess the numbers have dropped a little bit, so $170,000 a year. Prorated, you're not making a ton of money on a per hour basis, but the upside is tremendous. Well, it's timely. Just this week, yesterday in fact, Bloomberg Business Week put out a story, said no class. They bring glory and millions to their schools, but what are athletes getting in return? And basically what they laid out was that the University of North Carolina failed their athletes for over 20 years. They had over 200 classes that they held that actually never met, but players got grades for them. So the question is, are these players actually receiving an education? There are two questions here. One, is it free? The numbers speak for themselves. No, they earn every single dollar. Question number two is, are they actually receiving an education? Well, some people might say, well, this is isolated to the University of North Carolina. No, it's not. It happened at Oregon too. All the academic, I wrestled for a year, so I was in the sports academic advising department. All of my friends were funneled into classes that were, at the end of the day, not very valuable to them in the long run. Sociology was the big thing at Oregon, and we took Rocks for Jocks, is what we called it, geology. And in Rocks for Jocks, I'll give you one example of why it's often illusory. And let me make this clear. I'm not taking responsibility away from the players for engaging in this activity. I just want to make clear that the system is intended at these large football factories not to educate the student athletes necessarily, or the college athletes. It is to keep them eligible. And there is a vast distinction. My roommate, my freshman year, couldn't write a grammatically correct sentence to save his life. I know this because I helped him get through school. And you know, this was not an issue that was going to go away. What did they do? Did they put him in remedial reading courses and try and get him the basics? No, they shoved him into the rest of the classes they knew everybody could pass, and they didn't ask how he was passing, though they knew that he couldn't read very effectively and certainly couldn't write very effectively. The bottom line is this. They'd sit in the back of the class. We'd have, 10 to 15 football players, and there'd be a girl to the left that one of them was dating or had become friends with. And there'd be three variations of the test, A, B, and C. Well, everyone would swap out the test. They'd all have version A. And then what you'd have in the back of the class is 10 to 15 players, big, massive football players, and it's Oregon, so it's not the most diverse state. A lot of times the kids in the back of the class were African American, so you see all of the African American students in the class, all massive, all football players in sweats, sitting in the back of the class, in the very back of a stadium seating like this, and they'd all be looking to the left because everybody was filling in the bubbles from the girl at the far left. So everyone had the same answers, everyone got the same grade, and never was that pointed out. And that happened in astronomy, geology, a number of other classes. And again, I went to Oregon, so kind of fragging my institution here, but it's true. This happened. This is back in 2001. So if they're not getting an education, in a lot of cases, are they really receiving the bargain that they signed up for? The answer is no. And I will tell you this. UNC is getting hammered right now, which, it's good that it's being exposed, but they are far from the only university in the country where this kind of stuff goes on. Now, why is that a problem? Because we're talking about the transition to professional athletics, right? So the idea is, if they're not getting an education in the pure sense, they're not being given an education where it allows them to go out into the workforce and make $80,000, $90,000 eventually off of that which they learned in college because they were primarily focused on football, not on school, then what happens when they go to the pros? Are they prepared to deal with the world that they go into? I started a program between 2009 and 2010. It was called Synergy Sports Consulting. The idea was to work with schools to help their young men transition from the college athletic realm to the professional athletic realm. When you're 21 years old and you're from an impoverished background and you haven't really had much in the way of formal business training, how in the world do you know how to choose a CPA? How do you know how to choose an agent? How do you know how to choose an attorney or any other professional service provider? You don't. So you have to educate them, and SOCH doesn't get you there. So I wanted to help bridge this gap. I made one fundamental mistake, though, in creating my business. I thought that schools would care. I thought they'd care. Shame on me. Because after a year of my life, $25,000, the last $25,000 I had, and all of you know who've taken out loans, I have $200,000 in law loans, so it was a passion project, something I cared deeply about based on my experiences. I recognized after contacting 25 schools over the course of the year, they didn't care. And I'll give you one example to show you. I sent a episode of Outside the Lines to a guy at the University of Oklahoma. He's now athletic director at Ole Miss for compliance. And it was Antoine Walker and Kenny Anderson, and they were talking, it was called $1 Million Mistakes, and they were talking about how they lost their money over the course of their lives, lots of money. And who's going to feel bad for Antoine Walker? He's buying pink minks, Bentleys. He dated Evelyn Lozado, if any of you guys know who she is. She's going out and she's married a lot of athletes. All of them tend to end up going broke, a few athletes. So, he's a hard guy to feel bad for, right? But you have to ask yourself again, where did he come from? He came from nothing. In those neighborhoods, you don't know lawyers, you don't know doctors, you don't know CPAs, you don't know financial advisors, so you don't have any formal training. And so this is why I've got this analogy. They push you out of a plane, forgive the thing, but they push you out of a plane at 30,000 feet, and they scream to you as you go out the plane, good luck learning how to parachute on the way down. How do you learn how to parachute on the way down? You don't. That's why you hear these figures. 78% of the NFL players, even though the statistic may be skewed, go broke. Then a few years of leading the league, you have a three and a half year average career. 2 years after that, a lot of these guys find themselves in financial distress. I would attribute that to a lack of education. So when you look at it, the professional transition education at these schools is wholly inadequate. So rather than teaching them, hey, Jadeveon Clowney, you're probably not going to be a scholar. You are probably going to be a top-tier NFL draft prospect. We are going to teach you from the moment you hit our university how to live in that world. Instead, they push them into SOCH. Okay? So the question is it incumbent upon these schools to at least teach these kids who are making a ton of money for them, who are athletic stars, who are very clearly destined for professional success? Is it their job to prepare them, the schools that is, for their professional endeavors? I would argue very vehemently, absolutely, 100%. As it stands right now, as you see I've laid out, and I'm happy to discuss it in more depth, it's absolutely not happening. Now, on the back end, and I wish we could have talked more about this, but I know my time is short, and I'll wrap up here. The reason this is all problematic is we talked about at the front, the long tail, okay? Jeff Rubin was a guy who got a bunch of players to invest in a casino, an illegal gambling bingo casino in Dothan, Alabama. Why they thought it was a good idea, I'll never know. But their money's gone. $53 million. Hodge Bombard, I mentioned earlier, he was putting guys into what ended up being a Ponzi-like scheme, and they were saying, we'll give you 20% returns per annum, almost guaranteed, and the players said, sounds good. You offer me 20%, and hopefully any of you're running the opposite direction. These players jumped into it, lost a bunch of money, and the reason I have it and counting is I believe there's a second scheme that will ultimately end up collapsing as well for roughly the equivalent amount of money. Now, Both of these guys were registered by the NFLPA. All right. Fred Taylor told me, he's a former running back legend, when the NFLPA registers these guys, they take that seriously. They think it means something. Okay. They think that it means the NFLPA vetted these guys, etc. Both of these guys had so many red flags on their track record between the time that they were registered, and both were registered for nearly a decade, that had anybody done even a cursory search on these guys, you could have said, especially since it's up to the NFLPA to decide who gets in and who doesn't, to just say, look, you guys got marks on your record. We can't do it. Can't have you registered in our program. I'm sorry. If you don't have a clean sheet, you're not allowed in. Those guys obviously, ended up bad. Now, the reason I have Rosenhaus on there is because Rosenhaus had a relationship with Rubin. We've documented that. You can go search at Google, just Rosenhaus and Rubin. You'll see plenty of writing on that. But there are also all of these other things that he's done. I've written, myself, somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 15 articles that touch or concern his business practices. And again, so far the NFLPA has done absolutely nothing. So who in the world is protecting the players? You don't want to be overly paternalistic. You want the players to be able to do it themselves. But the question is, if they can't do it themselves, if we know the colleges are failing them in terms of their education on the way in, once they get to the NFL, I'm just speaking with the NFL because that's where I focus these stories, doesn't the NFLPA owe them a duty to protect them from these guys, a heightened duty? And again, I would argue strongly the answer is absolutely yes. It's not happening. Not only that, so I've been writing about this stuff for 2 years. Not only have they not done anything, or let me reverse. Not only have they not said anything, they won't respond to my inquiries on these things, they haven't done anything. And that's troubling because these players are out there getting destroyed consistently. And then the last thing is issues in arbitration. We can get into this another day, but Sean Jackson, Terrell Owens, they've got a long-time arbitrator at the NFLPA. These players are running from arbitration because they don't think they can get a fair shake. And so my point to you is, from the moment they leave high school to the time they go into college to the time they go into the NFLPA till they leave and they become broke, and Terrell Owens is obviously broke, and Sean Jackson spends a lot of money. If he's not careful, he'll find himself in trouble. He's a Philly guy, so it's somebody you guys should care about a little bit. It's a question for all of you again, and I'll circle back to what I said in the beginning. Which side of history are you going to be on? Are you going to work to make this a better world for these young men? And granted, again, they're not the most sympathetic figures, but you have to understand there's more to it than them just being knuckleheads. Or are you going to continue to perpetuate a system that doesn't prepare them, that doesn't allow them to garner the tools, resources, and education necessary to succeed in the world that they go into? And whatever the answer to that question is, guys and ladies, please recognize, I know there's no one-size-fits-all answer, but from a normative standpoint, we can do better. We should do better. I hope we do better. And other than that, again, if I'm ever able to answer any questions for you guys offline, please let me know. Greatly appreciate you guys having me. Thank you so much for giving me the time. Look forward to speaking with you all.